Taoiseach, at a Fine Gael press conference, you told reporters that as you canvass around the country, you have heard too many examples of the bulk buying of homes by wealthy property funds. But of course you already knew that this was happening, Taoiseach, and that it's not happening by accident. Property funds bulk buying family homes is a direct result of government policy. Over a decade ago, Fine Gael rolled out the red carpet for these funds with sweetheart tax deals. And you've renewed that policy year after year, choosing repeatedly to value the interests of vulture funds over ordinary people looking to buy a home. And that is exactly why these funds can push ordinary home buyers out of the market and then rent these homes back to the same families at rip-off rents. The stories of property funds snapping up family homes have hit the headlines over and over again. I've lost count of the number of times that we have raised this greedy and damaging practice with your government. So you shouldn't have to go out on a canvas to tell you how bad it is out there. You'll recall in January how a British fund bought up 46 of 54 homes in a new estate in Balgriffin. They then put these homes up for rent for extortionate rents of up to €3,000 a month. And this wasn't a once-off. According to the CSO, over 4,200 homes were bought up by funds in 2021 and 2022 alone. And your response to this has really been no response at all. New figures show that the 10% stamp duty that you introduced on bulk buying of homes is failing. Since your government introduced this measure, funds have snapped up hundreds of homes that should be available to workers and families. Far from being deterred, property funds, vulture funds, were in fact emboldened. Bulk buying actually increased in the years after you introduced this measure. They know that they can offset the stamp duty by charging sky-high rents. So after backing the property funds to the hilt, and now 2 weeks before an election, you say that there are too many examples of funds buying up family homes. You also said that you want a review. You must think people have very short memories, Taoiseach. You've had chance after chance to stop these funds in their tracks. When government introduced the 10% stamp duty, we told you that it was too low to act as a deterrent, but you didn't listen. 4 months ago, following the fiasco in Balgriffin, we brought forward a motion to stop property funds bulk purchasing family homes, but you voted it down. And we've repeatedly called on government to increase the stamp duty on bulk purchase to a level that will actually work. But only last week, Minister McGrath told my colleague Pearse Doherty that he has no plans to increase the rate of stamp duty that vulture funds are charged from buying up homes. So that's the hard reality, Taoiseach. Tá cistí muoine sever fós a ceannach tithe teaghlaí ó thrón na ceannaitheoirí tí. Ní mór inis ag an rialtas rud ag an suntasach a dhéanamh faoi seo agus sin cad atá daoine ag éirí. Taoiseach, so you're talking about a review. I think that is simply spoof, and I think it is spin. But you might like to tell us what you propose. What level of stamp duty do you propose as a deterrent, since your 10% is clearly failing?
Taoiseach, please.
Well, thanks very much, Ceann Comhairle, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity today to expand in relation to this important issue, because it is always important when it comes to housing, when it comes to one of the biggest intergenerational challenges of our time, that government is willing to listen and that government is willing to respond. And of course, something you don't hear from the previous speaker is that we do live in a country now where every working day we're seeing so many homes being built, where so far this year, every working day, we see around 350 new homes being built, where every week around 500 young people and couples are buying their first home, where this year so far over 32,000 homes have commenced construction. Almost as many homes have commenced construction this year so far as did totally in the previous year. That is real progress, and that does give people wanting to move out of the box room of their parents' house, and indeed parents wanting their adult child to move out of the box room, real hope as well. But the issue of bulk buying and bulk purchasing of houses is an issue that I want to see further action on, because as I've said previously, it's clear from the Housing Commission report, which you lauded here last week before having an opportunity to read it, that we do need both private and public investment to add to our housing stock. But I do think even within that context, we cannot have a situation where the bulk purchase of homes needed for first-time buyers is allowed to continue unimpeded. Now, we have already acted, and it's important to acknowledge that, Ceann Comhairle, something that again didn't get mentioned in the previous 3 minutes. The government has already put in place both tax measures and planning measures to try and address this issue. But I'm very clear, I want to take further measures. And just to be clear, that's exactly how I voted in the Dáil in January. It's exactly how Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and Green TDs voted in the Dáil in January. When we voted not down your motion, we voted for our motion, and our motion very clearly said that the government is committed to ensuring that newly built houses are available to first-time buyers and owner-occupiers, and the government will continue to examine how best we can achieve this. So we didn't vote in the way that you like to describe. My own party at our Ardèche in recent weeks also passed a motion calling on this party and me as its new leader to take further action in this situation as well. So be clear, Ceann Comhairle, it's government policy to prevent the bulk purchase of houses. We've already introduced a higher rate of stamp duty, and we've already introduced new planning rules. But we're continuously monitoring the situation to see if more needs to be done. Now, for some context, the higher stamp duty rate has applied to less than 1% of residential property transactions between May 2021 to the end of 2023. And we have also seen the Minister for Housing introduce Section 28 guidelines in 2021. This aims to provide an owner-occupier guarantee by ensuring that new own-door houses and duplex units in housing developments can no longer be bulk purchased by institutional investors in a manner that causes displacement of individual purchasers or social and affordable housing, including cost rental. And what the figures already show is that the introduction of these guidelines to December 2023 has resulted in over 40,000 homes granted planning permission with conditions prohibiting the bulk purchase by or multiple sale to a single purchaser. So we have acted. We will take further action, but let's not misrepresent the government's position at all. I know why you wish to distract from the positive housing figures that we've seen, because you've never seen a challenge you don't wish to exploit, misinform or misdirect people on.
MacDonald.
So I'm astonished, therefore, if what you were saying was accurate, why it is out on the canvas that you're hearing so much about this.
That's not accurate.
How is it that if the government's response has been so effective, how is it then, Taoiseach, out on the canvas that you are hearing these accounts of vulture funds snapping up family homes? I mean, are the people out on the ground wrong too? We live in a country where we have sky-high housing prices, sky-high rents, record homelessness, and young people and their parents, frankly, in despair. Your housing policy is not working, and do a little bit more canvassing, Taoiseach, if you doubt me, and you will find that I am reflecting to you the truth on the ground. You introduced the 10% stamp duty, and in fact, far from the number of bulk purchases falling, it actually accelerated year on year. I have the figures here. They were given to my colleague Pearse Doherty by means of a parliamentary response. They have trebled, quadrupled between 2021 and 2023. Now, you say you want a review and you want to take further action. Here's an action you need to take. 10% is not a deterrent. What level will you set the stamp duty at to be a real deterrent and stop these vulture funds in their tracks?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
So it's entirely possible, Deputy MacDonald, though it might be a new one on you, to be able to report progress in an area of societal challenge and still wish to do more in that area. As I travel around the country, and I'm sure you do, most of the time anyway, as you travel around the country, I'm sure you see plenty of examples of new homes being built. I'm sure you knock on doors where you see new people having moved into homes. I'm sure you meet people, probably hundreds if not thousands, who've benefited from schemes that for some bizarre reason you're against. Any first-time buyer watching this today, or the parent of a first-time buyer who's gotten the first time the Help to Buy scheme that you'd abolish, thousands of their own money back, they wouldn't have been able to actually save for their deposit without that. So as I travel around the country, I see lots of progress when it comes to housing, and I now know that there's 350 new homes being built in this country every single working day. 500 people a week buying their first home, over 32,000 homes already. But we still wish to do more. Less than 1% of residential property transactions saw that higher rate of stamp duty. I want to see more. I want to see it reviewed. The government intends to review it in the context of the budget.
Holly Kearns, the leader of the Social Democrats, please.
Good morning, Cian Corla. Taoiseach, every week I think we've witnessed the limits of human cruelty and depravity when it comes to Israel's genocide in Gaza, and each week I'm proven wrong. Israel's missile strike on Sunday evening on a tented refugee camp in Rafah was not just a despicable human rights violation, it was depraved and inhumane. On Sunday night, displaced men, women and children cowering in tents were deliberately burned alive. One man who was pictured in the aftermath held the badly burned body of his beheaded baby in his arms. I say this not to be graphic or to shock, but because we have to talk about the reality of the hell on earth in Gaza. What we're witnessing is mass murder by a rogue government that flouts international law and ignores rulings from international courts. Israel's military initially described the missile strike as precise. Later, when even Israel's biggest cheerleaders expressed horror, Netanyahu said it was a tragic error, just like the tragic error last month that led to missile strikes on an aid convoy, killing 7 aid workers. Is there anyone who still believes that the enormous death toll in Gaza is an error? Because it is abundantly clear that civilian deaths are not just acceptable to the Israeli government, they are deliberate. Taoiseach, yesterday, as civilians in Rafah searched through ashes for dismembered remains of their loved ones, the EU issued a press statement about sanctions. In fact, it issued 2 statements about sanctions, but they weren't directed at Israel. They were about Russia. The EU has set up another sanctions regime to target Russia. Russian war crimes are rightly condemned and sanctioned by the EU. But Israeli war crimes are not just ignored, they are facilitated by the EU through the sale of arms and preferential trading. Some have referred to the meeting of EU foreign ministers yesterday as being a hopeful sign that the EU apathy is ending. Frankly, I think it's outrageous it took until yesterday and more than 36,000 deaths in Gaza for sanctions on Israel to even be discussed in a serious way. The EU has disgraced itself through its callous inaction and ambivalence on Gaza. EU leaders complicit in this carnage, like Ursula von der Leyen, should be ashamed. Taoiseach, I really welcome that today we will formally recognise the State of Palestine and that finally the Palestinian flag will fly on the grounds of Leinster House. Symbolism and solidarity are important. But what we really need are punitive sanctions on Israel, here and at EU level. Taoiseach, why won't your government take that action against Israel? Introduce the Occupied Territories Bill. At least give me the new legal advice that you promised last week I still haven't received. Don't vote for the re-election of Ursula von der Leyen and remove the diplomatic status of the ambassador.
Thank you, Deputy Kearns. Taoiseach.
Look, I want to thank Deputy Kearns for raising this very important issue, and I too, like her, welcome the fact that today Ireland will recognise the state of Palestine. I think it's a significant moment. I think it's a historic moment. I think it's an important moment, both to recognise that you can't have a two-state solution without recognising 2 states, but also I hope to create a positive momentum towards more countries now recognising the state of Palestine. And I know there are others actively considering it, and I today repeat my calls for them to join us through their national processes in the coming weeks as well. But I too am very much aware that we recognise the state of Palestine today against a backdrop that is almost unimaginable and is utterly unconscionable in terms of the humanitarian catastrophe that is unfolding in Gaza, in Rafah, and in the region. Children being starved, hunger being used as a weapon of war. And this country has been calling for an immediate and sustainable humanitarian ceasefire, the unconditional release of all hostages, and full, safe and unhindered humanitarian access for many, many months. We are now seeing children starving, and we are seeing children going to bed not knowing if they will wake up. But what we're also now seeing is a new despicable trend where every now and then, amidst the backdrop of death, maiming, injury, pain, we're seeing an event of particular horror that takes place, and then we're seeing the Israeli Prime Minister emerge and apologise for what he terms a tragic mistake. April's tragic mistake was the bombing of aid workers providing food to starving Gazans. May's tragic mistake was the bombing of displaced children, parents and families who had fled to a designated safe zone in truly appalling scenes. Imagine taking your child to somewhere that you believe they will be somewhat safe, to have that very place of refuge then bombed, and then the apology for a tragic mistake. The question the world must now ask itself, Ireland, Europe, the United States, what will June's tragic mistake be? And much more importantly, what are we going to do to stop it? As I've consistently said, and I said at the April meeting of the European Council, there's an onus on every country and on the European Union to use every lever at its disposal to help bring about a ceasefire. It's not enough to just condemn. It's not enough to just find it repugnant. It's not enough to just be repulsed. There is a need for action. And that's why I do warmly welcome the decision of the Belgian presidency yesterday, belatedly, to convene a meeting of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Because this country, I think there's a political consensus on this country and Spain since March have been calling for the association agreement, which is effectively a trade benefit agreement, to be reviewed. Contained within that are human rights clauses. Human rights clauses are not there for padding. They're not there to make the agreement longer. They're not there because they're nice to have. They're there and they have meaning. And those meanings must be adhered to as well. So everyone needs to look at all levers at our disposal. I have answered before the question in relation to occupied territories. I will share with you more information in relation to that. But the way I think you address this issue is through, at an EU level, the association agreement and the review of that.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Kearns.
Taoiseach, the rhetoric is great, and I think I'm blue in the face acknowledging it. What we're asking for is action that's proportionate. So you're talking about wanting the EU to use every lever available to them. And that's precisely what I'm asking you to do, because there are actions we can take as a sovereign state while the EU hasn't come round to the very obvious breach of the human rights clause in the EU-Israel trade agreement. Months ago, your predecessor, Leo Varadkar, wrote to Ursula von der Leyen seeking a review of the EU-Israel trade agreement, and she didn't even reply to the letter. She's someone who gave Israel her unqualified support for their war crimes. And yet you're happy to recommend the re-election of this person as the European Commission President. Do you really think that Fine Gael MEPs and candidates in the European election are representing their voters on this issue? Taoiseach, when international institutions fail, it's up to independent states to take a stronger stance. You're saying you can't introduce the Occupied Territories Bill because of this legal advice. You promised to show us last week, but we haven't seen it. What of the illegal Israeli settlement divestment bill? What of the diplomatic status of the ambassador? What about all of these levers that are available to you? So you're calling the EU out and saying they're not using the levers available to them. What are you going to do about the things that are available to you now?
Taoiseach.
No, I'm not calling the EU out. We're part of the EU. We joined it. We're members of it. We're around the table. And what I'm doing every single day with colleagues across government, including the Taoiseach, is working at a European level to help bring about the actions that do need to happen. Europe has not covered itself in glory in relation to this humanitarian catastrophe. I'm very clear in relation to that. Mistakes have been made. Condemnation is not enough. There needs to be clear action. It has been the position of this country and one other member state, Spain, since the month of March, that the association agreement should be reviewed. We saw yesterday the fact that there is now growing support for that position. These things don't happen by accident. They happen through the diplomatic and political efforts of this country. And we'll keep that up, and we intend to continue to engage. We're taking practical actions every day, whether it's humanitarian aid, whether it's engaging with Palestinian counterparts, whether it's talking to people in the region, whether it's the Taoiseach attending the meeting of Arab states and EU states yesterday, whether it's the recognition of the state of Palestine, working with Norway and Spain. In relation to the ambassador, I don't believe in expelling ambassadors, because I believe you keep lines open even with countries you vehemently disagree with. But what I do take grave offence to is the way our ambassador was treated in Tel Aviv. You don't parade ambassadors in front of television cameras and video them while they watch horrific films. We'd never do that to an ambassador in this country.
Deputy Cathal Berry, please, on behalf of the regional group.
Concorda, and good afternoon, Taoiseach. I want to raise with you today the issue of road safety, particularly in advance of the bank holiday weekend. As we all know in this chamber, the fatality statistics they're trending in the wrong direction again, which is very unfortunate and sad. 79 at the last count already this year, which is 10 more than the same period last year. And we know what the reasons are for these things, Taoiseach. We know that it's driver behaviour, it's speeding, driving under the influence, it's distracted with mobile phones, it's weather conditions sometimes. But one factor, one variable that's never really mentioned, it's the pre-hospital medical trauma system in this country. Will a functioning pre-hospital trauma system reduce the amount of collisions? No, but it will certainly mitigate against the downstream consequences, and it will improve viability, it improves survivability and outcomes as well. So Ireland is very fortunate. We have 2 helicopters on station at the moment, one in Cork and one in Athlone, and they're providing a very good service at paramedic and advanced paramedic level within their scope of practice. So they have saved hundreds of lives since those 2 services were conceived a number of years ago. But Ireland is unusual. Ireland is an outlier. We don't have a multidisciplinary medical team on board these helicopters, and specifically I mean consultant anaesthetists, consultant emergency medical physicians. We have paramedics and advanced paramedics, yes, but not the full multidisciplinary team. And all the international evidence would suggest that if you put a multidisciplinary team together, you're going to have a far better outcome. And the reason is simple. You'll be much more capable of doing advanced interventions at the roadside or at the point of injury. And what I'm talking about is intubations, advanced resuscitation, and blood transfusion. So look, Taoiseach, Wales has 6 of these HEMS teams, they're called, Helicopter Emergency Medical System teams. Northern Ireland actually has 2 of these HEMS teams, but this jurisdiction has none. So what I'm asking the Taoiseach is, would you be prepared to meet a group of consultant physicians, to listen to them, to hear their arguments in relation to upgrading our pre-trauma helicopter medical service so that we can all work together to reduce the number of fatalities on our roads. And on top of that then, if you're happy with that meeting, Minister, will you task the HSE to look at this proposal, to see is it viable, and see can we end this carnage that's taking place on our motorways and our roads around the country. Thank you very much, Taoiseach.
Thank you, Dr. Berry.
Well, thank you very much to Deputy Dr. Berry for raising this issue, for this important issue. And at the outset, let me say I absolutely will take that meeting and think we'd benefit greatly from that expertise and from listening to those individuals. So very happy to do that. I want to thank you for raising, firstly, the issue of road safety as we do face into another bank holiday weekend, and everybody needs to be conscious of what they call the killer behaviours that can take place on Irish roads. We are putting a particular emphasis on road safety. This is something I've put a particular emphasis on in recent weeks as well, working with Minister Chambers, Minister Ryan, Minister McEntee. We have met with the Road Safety Authority. We've met with Garda Síochána to hear what more they can do urgently to address the issue. And following that meeting, we did agree a number of immediate measures that could be put in place, including further awareness campaigns, increased public expenditure on those awareness campaigns that I think people want to see and expect to see more of on their TV screens and on their radio stations as well. Increasing public awareness of enforcement plans by Garda Síochána, steps to resolve the suspension of data sharing between the RSA and local authorities, and investment to deliver safety improvements on our roads. I also convened and chaired a meeting of the Government's Ministerial Road Safety Committee to ensure early progress on these issues and other responses in relation to the recent increase in road deaths. And this is, of course, in addition to the Road Traffic Bill 2024 that's been brought forward by Minister Chambers. It passed the Dáil on the 6th of March and passed the Shannon last week, and it didn't pass the Shannon on the 11th of April, and it's due to be signed into law shortly. This bill does deal with a number of issues. As Deputy Berry has said, aeromedical services are a highly effective means of reaching patients in remote areas and in vital situations where road ambulances would be incapable of achieving an effective or a timely response. I'm very aware of the calls for multidisciplinary teams on board. This is an issue that has been raised on a number of occasions. It's important to say at the outset that in terms of consultant-led HEMS response, the HSE National Ambulance Service does provide 2 consultant-led HEMS responses in Ireland, both of which indeed the Deputy has mentioned, with additional aeromedical support from the Irish Coast Guard. Both HEMS responses provide fast access to life-saving pre-hospital emergency care interventions at the scene by highly trained advanced paramedics. The focus of HEMS in Ireland is on providing rapid access for patients to the most appropriate clinical care. But this is an area in which we should be seeking to do more. We should be examining our responses, and we should be willing to listen to new ideas. So I am very pleased to inform the Deputy that the HSE's National Ambulance Service are now about to commence a feasibility study of physicians crewing on the NAS HEMS aircraft next month, with the trial expected to last around 4 months. This trial will see the National Ambulance Service affiliated emergency medicine consultants with considerable experience in pre-hospital emergency medicine undertaking a number of rotations per week on each of the HEMS aircraft alongside advanced paramedics. The ambulance service will then evaluate the information gathered from the trial to determine the clinical competencies best suited for the HEMS service and how best to deploy these in the future to support optimal clinical outcomes for patients. So very much look forward to taking that meeting and hope that this trial gives us some good information too.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy.
Thank you, Taoiseach. That's better than I was expecting, actually. So thanks for the response. Thanks also for agreeing to meet the physicians, and the feasibility study as well. It will be very, very positive development. So reducing the number of fatalities on our roads would be a sufficient reason for this system. But I see my constituency colleague, Minister Martin Hayden, across the chamber there. So it's not just roads, also from a farming point of view. There's a lot of trauma incidents with machinery on farms and also building sites all across rural Ireland. So it's not just confined to our roads. I think we need to get this system up and running as soon as possible, Taoiseach, and I would urge the Taoiseach to move towards implementation as soon as the feasibility study is complete. Thanks very much, Taoiseach.
Taoiseach.
Deputy Berry, I'm conscious I'm sitting beside a colleague and a friend, Minister Humphreys, who knows all too well how that life-saving service made a massive difference to her own daughter Tara's life. This is a service that I think everybody in Ireland really, really values. They do absolutely incredible work. We live in a country that is small in geographic size, but can be somewhat vast in terms of the remote ways in which our emergency services need to endeavour to respond to people in real time, and at a time when we know both response times and indeed the clinical competencies at the scene can make an absolutely incredible difference to the clinical outcomes and indeed to the life of an individual. So I am really pleased that this is an issue that is being taken very seriously by the Health Service, by the National Ambulance Service, really encouraged and foot of inquiring into this to find out about this new feasibility study where physicians will be crewing the HEMS aircraft from next month for a period of 4 months, and there'll be rotations and an opportunity to learn from that, and not just a trial to see is there benefit in doing this, but actually a trial more specifically to identify the clinical competencies going forward, and very much look forward to taking that meeting with the physicians and thank them for reaching out.
Thank you. Deputy Catherine Connolly.
Míl mágad the Ceann agus bhhatlam fille an ceist na Palestina agus bhhatlam fáilte cá raibh an cinenne an rialtas ahantas a hort don stát mar stát neamhsblach is rud is céim chun cinné sin ach tá gá le bríthar eile is gá le gníomh a dhéanamh anis réimse leathan gníomha chun bart a dhéanamh de réir am ríthair. I'm returning to Palestine, and it's difficult to talk actually with the images coming on our television screens night after night, and it's clearly that Israel is out of control. The government and the army is out of control, and they're acting with impunity. And while I welcome your very good decision, and it's a proud day for Ireland, and later on today the Palestinian flag will be raised, I absolutely welcome that. It has taken too long. It has taken the deaths of 36,500 people, the vast majority women and children. And it has taken their deaths, and there are more deaths today, for us to do the most basic thing that we've promised for years, to recognise the state of Palestine. And in recognising that state, we must then decide what steps will we now take to give meaning to that. because we need to give meaning to that decision. And we have taken that decision, and I'm praising you for it. However, it was taken following the protests on the ground over and over, and the sense of outrage and upset. I mean, on any given day, I think TDs in this stall were receiving up to 10,000 emails telling us to do something, to act. And while we have acted to a certain extent now with the recognition, I would like today, Taoiseach, either in response to me or later, what steps precisely you're going to take to make that meaningful. And obviously for me, the most meaningful number of steps is to stop the troops and the arms going through Shannon, to enact the Occupied Territories Bill, to stop the trading with Israel, to have sanctions against Israel, and to recognise that they are completely out of control. And why it has taken us this long is something we need to reflect on, because we are also part of that bloodshed that's happening in Palestine, in our name. Because we have refused to act with various reports and various decisions. Amnesty International told us quite some time ago that the system was apartheid. They were running an apartheid regime. We ignored when 6 human rights organisations were classified as terrorist. And we ignored a lot of other things, including the fact, as far back as 2015, the International Criminal Court started a preliminary investigation into crimes that Israel were committing. And from 2015, slowly and methodically, the chief prosecutor built up a case to the point where she opened a formal investigation, and her successor is now following up on that. And the reason, by issuing arrest warrants, can you imagine, arrest warrants have been issued for the Prime Minister of Israel and for his Defence Minister, as well as the 3 leaders of Hamas. And that's followed on from years, slowly and methodically, building up a case, while we did nothing. We did absolutely nothing other than words. In fact, the human Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur, told us we were very good on rhetoric and not on action. I'll finish on the month after the 7th of October, the General Secretary of the United Nations told us that Gaza was becoming a graveyard for children, that the nightmare in Gaza was more than a humanitarian crisis, it was a crisis of humanity. And yesterday he affirmed there was no safe place in Gaza, demanding that the horror must stop. My apologies for going over time.
I want to thank Deputy Connolly for raising the issue in relation to Palestine and the horrific humanitarian catastrophe that continues to unfold. I acknowledge her welcome for the fact that it is a proud day for Ireland in recognising the state of Palestine. And I also recognise that this is very much something that the people have led on. I very much heard that as I go around the country and as I've met people, very respectfully and very forcefully and very passionately putting forward their view that Ireland must act. And the only point I'd slightly, not to be disagreeable, but slightly disagree with you on when you say it's taken too long. It's always been the position of this government and previous governments, and indeed many governments around the EU and other parts of the world, that recognition of a 2-state solution would come as part of a peace process. What we've actually done is change the order, because in many ways we're recognising the state of Palestine now at a time when a comprehensive, sustainable, just peace settlement looks further away than ever before. And we're doing so because we have to keep that destination alive, because others are literally seeking to bomb it to oblivion. So I do think, and I do sense from my engagement with people in the region, from my engagement with counterparts in the region, from my engagement at an EU level, the actions that Ireland, that Spain, that Norway have taken today will have a positive effect beyond just our own recognition. For example, there are more member states in the European Union now considering doing the same. A number have publicly indicated their wish to do the same in the weeks ahead. Is it possible that you get to a point during the course of this year where a majority of member states of the European Union now recognise the state of Palestine, where a majority of prime ministers and presidents of the European Council recognise the existence of the state of Palestine? And what does that do in terms of positive momentum and change in policy and approach as well? I do think Ireland, by any objective standard, has been extraordinarily proactive in relation to this. I pay tribute to the Taoiseach, I pay tribute to our diplomats, to my own department, to my predecessor, to so many who have done a lot of work in this area, whether it's supporting the work of the ICJ when others somewhat seek to undermine it, whether it's providing additional funding in a very practical way to help the work and the investigations, whether it's increasing aid from a humanitarian point of view to UNRWA when others seek to distance themselves from UNRWA as well. These are all practical measures that we have taken. But I do believe when it comes to the Occupied Territories Bill, I mean, the clear legal advice to government is, and consistently has been, that legislation would not be compatible with EU law. And therefore, I think the ways we need to advance this is at a European level. And I think the decision yesterday of the Belgian presidency in relation to a meeting on the Israeli-EU association agreement is significant. I genuinely believe it is significant. The practical measures we now intend to take is to continue at every single forum, because ultimately the results of success or not here for everybody in the world is a cessation of violence. And anything that doesn't bring that about will prove to have been ineffective.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
We've come to the point where we're recognising the state of Palestine, where there's very little left to recognise, except the determination of the Palestinian people. Palestine has been bombed practically out of existence. The International Court of Justice last week issued a very strong order. Israel completely ignored that. Over the weekend, they dropped a 2,000-pound bomb. That's what was used, supplied by the US, our friends, of course. And there was a British, I understand, a British Air Force Shadow spy plane flying overhead at the time. Since that order, over the weekend, 200 Palestinians, mostly women and children, have been murdered, and I use that word, murdered, by Israeli bombing in several areas throughout Gaza. It's glaringly obvious that the whole purpose is genocide and to eradicate the Palestinian people. I did not join in with the call for the Israeli ambassador to be expelled. And on the last occasion that I spoke, I said it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to stand by that decision. This is a woman, an ambassador, who was threatening us in relation to trade, who was openly using our airwaves to threaten us, doing exactly what Mossad did, outlined yesterday in The Guardian, what Mossad did in relation to the International Criminal Court, in relation to the chief prosecutor. So it is time for us to act. The most basic thing is not to support van der Leyen, who from day one said she would stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel. That would be one obvious thing.
It's the clear position of President von der Leyen that she wishes to see an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. That is the clear position of Ursula von der Leyen. You can shake your head if you wish, Deputy Pringle. It's the clear position of the conclusions of the April European Council. I was at it, you weren't there, but the ability to read the count, the ability for Irish people to not be misinformed or misdirected in relation to the position of the European Council, including the President of the European Commission, is important, because there's enough misinformation out there at the moment. We need to see an immediate ceasefire. We need to see practical actions to help bring that about. And as I have said on behalf of Ireland at the European Council, what I have said this morning, what I will say this evening, what I will say everywhere and in every forum, as will the government, we must now use every lever at our disposal to bring about that environment. It's not enough to just call for a ceasefire. We have to see what can be done to put pressure to make that a reality. And that's why it's the position of Ireland since March that the association agreement, the trade benefit agreement, should be reviewed. I'm pleased now to see others join us in that call. That needs to happen, because I'm not ready to stand idly by and wait for Netanyahu's apology for the tragic mistake of June, as he continually does now when there's particular horrors that emerge on our TV screens and on our radio stations. This is an extraordinarily, horrifically difficult situation. The scale of humanitarian catastrophe, I don't think, is even fully understood. And I want the people of this country to know that the government is doing everything we possibly can to voice their concerns and their views in every forum, and we're taking a very practical step in recognising the state of Palestine today to give hope to the Palestinian people at the darkest hour, and I know that's really appreciated and means a lot to people in Palestine today.
Thank you very much.